Welcome to week 14, Development 1. Let's get this going. Here we go. Developmental psychology, the study of how organisms change over time as a result of biological and environmental influences. Okay, so as we progress through our lifetime, we have different developmental psychology aspects. So when we're a baby, what we focus on then is different than when we focus on as an adult. So we're going to go through three major stages. Actually four technically: prenatal, infancy, childhood, adult. So at every different level there's different things going on. Okay, so how do psychologists look at developmental? Development is a process of growth and change brought about by an interaction of heredity and environment. So the genes your parents pass to you while you are conceived affect you, as well as what you're exposed to in your environment. So, nature nurture, although we've talked about this in other topics, we're back to discussing it. In psychology, it's a huge aspect. It's a theme. Remember when we talked about first week? It's a major theme of psychology. So we're going to constantly come back to these. Nature nurture argument is a long-standing discussion over the relative importance of nature, heredity, and nurture environment in their influence on behavior and mental processes. So as we're going through this section, we're going to be looking at what has more influence. Is it the heredity, or is it the nurture, the behavior? Okay. Another tool that we use, that's something that should be familiar, another theme, if you will, is twin studies. Okay. We use twins, especially identical twins, in order to look at the relationship. Developmental investigations in which twins, especially identical twins, are compared in the search for genetic and environmental effects. Okay, so looking at nature nurture, we want to see how people grow similarly and grow differently. What makes us different? What are the specific benchmarks that all of us meet? Okay, identical twins are a pair who started with a single fertilized egg and which later split into two distinct individuals. Fraternal are two separate eggs that's separated by two separate fertilized a pair of life that started as two separate eggs with two separate sperms. Okay, just happen to share the same womb, just like if it was a brother sister. Okay, this should be a review. Adoption studies, looking at the relationship of heredity, nature versus nurture. In nature, we're looking at how similar genetically people are raised in different environments and how that relates. Are they still as similar as they were, or are they not? Studies in which adopted children's characteristics are compared with those of biological family and the adoptive family. We talked about this in week 3, analyzing how twins actually do relate. Are they similar? And if they are similar, even though they're raised in different families, then we can assure ourselves that it's a nature quality rather than nurture. However, if one twin is a very big neat freak and the other one is not, even though they're separated, obviously that's more of a environmental effect, not quite nature. So, continuity versus discontinuity. Okay, so as in our continuity viewpoint, as our age grows, we get more and more performance bound. Okay, which means that we continue to learn, progress, and go. So the older we are, the more things we can do. Now the discontinuity perspective is that at certain areas we learn a lot of information and then we hold out for a while. Then we learn a lot of information and then we use it for a while. Then we learn a lot of information and then we use that for a while. So discontinuity use is that we learn certain things, we use it for a while, and then we improve our knowledge in a large manner. Okay? The continuity is a continual go, a constant go. So the gradual versus abrupt change. Now, in our developmental stages, like I said, there's 4 major ones. Periods of life inhibited by significant transition or changes in physical or psychological function. So at different stages, our body or our mind is doing 2 different things: processing, learning more, retaining more, creating more. While psychological traits are formed by the interaction of heredity and the environment, many traits have strong genetic influences. For instance, our sex drives, all of that, although we have the starting of it in our childhood, that doesn't come into full shape into our young adolescence. Okay, so developmental stages show us for both physical and cognitive aspects. So at different stages, we're physically and mentally doing certain things, and it takes a while to advance past that. So what capabilities does? The newborns have an innate abilities to finding nourishment, interacting with others, and avoid harmful situations. The developing abilities of infants and children rely on learning. So what we're talking about here is that our children, our babies, are not born defenseless. They are in fact born with some sort of skills. They're able to, realize what they need and what they don't. So there's two types of growth as we go through. Proximodestal is from the center of the body outwards towards the extremities, referring from the development of an embryo, and also later stages of development, in which growth is fastest near the head and torso and progressively slower towards the hands and feet. So thinking of a child in a womb, okay, the head and the chest are going to grow first, and then the arms and legs are eventually going to grow later. So think about it. It kind of makes sense. All of our vital organs, our hearts, our lungs, our stomachs, our digestive system are in our chest or our torso, and our brains is where all this information is being processed, and all that is in our head. So it makes sense that those would be growing first. The Sophia caudal is from head to tail, referring from the development of an embryo and also later stages of development, in which growth is fastest at the head and progressively slower to the parts of the body. Okay? If you think about it, if you've ever seen a baby, babies have big heads. Okay? So what happens is that our body focuses on growing our brains, making sure those are functioning, and then it slowly starts to let everything else catch up by focusing on growing those parts of the bodies. Now, the prenatal development is what we're going to focus on first, because that's where the first structures of life come from. The prenatal period is the developmental period before birth. The zygote, the embryo, and the fetus are all major parts. Now, the zygote, embryo, and fetus are all located inside the placenta, an organ that develops between the embryo, fetus, and the mother. Teratogens are toxic substances that can damage the developing organism. So let's take a quick overview of genetics. We've talked about this before, so I'm going to kind of fly through it. Chromosomes are long, twisted strands of DNA and are found in the nucleus of all cells. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. DNA is a chemical base of heredity and carries instruction. So having one strand of DNA, okay, allows us to make one whole of you. A DNA code carried on each chromosome is arranged in thousands of segments called genes. Genes are the basic unit of heredity. Okay, so how does it all start? Conception, when a sperm meets an egg. Okay, so inside the sperm, okay, we have genetic codes. Packed in the nucleus of every cell of your body, there's 23 pairs, okay, which form, all these genes form a chromosome. The gene segment of a chromosome that contains the genetic information. That genetic information is DNA. Conception. At conception, the genes carried on the 23rd chromosomes contributed by your biological mother's ovum were paired with genes carried by 23 chromosomes contributed by your biological father's sperm, creating your unique genetic makeover. Creating gene pairs are involved in directing many complex features of development. Okay? So, if your mom egg and your dad's different sperm, you would be made differently. All of your dad's sperm is not the same, just like your mom's eggs are not all the same. Look at your brothers and sisters. Technically, same sperm, same eggs. We're all not matching here. You're not directly tied exactly like your brother or sister. So here's some example of DNA. We've talked about this, gone through very specifically before. So dominant and recessive genes, the genotype is the underlying genetic makeup. Okay, so the genotype is what is probably going to occur. Phenotype are traits that are expressly displayed. Okay, so genotype is recessive, phenotype is dominant. Dominant genes will always be expressed if if present. Okay? Traits such as freckles, dark eyes, dark hair, and dimples are referred to as dominant characteristics because they require only one member of the gene pair to be dominant for the trait to be displayed. For instance, my mom has dimples. I have dimples. Dimples are our dominant gene. Recessive genes are expressed if only paired with identical recessive genes. So, in a dominant gene, my mom is the only one who has dimples. My dad does not. I have dimples. Okay? With a recessive gene, it only takes one parent it takes both parents to have identical recessive genes. Will not be expressed if paired with a dominant gene. So for instance, if you have red hair, your mom has an identical recessive gene for red hair, and your dad has an identical recessive gene for red hair, hence why you have red hair. We inherit from our biological parents a genetic potential, the expression of what can be influenced by environmental conditions. So we have all these things. It takes our conditions to shape it. So, characteristics: eye color, hair, hands, face. Dominant, brown, dark, curly, extra fingers, limb dwarfing, broad lips, dimples are all dominant genes. Recessive genes are gray, blue, light, straight, 5 fingers, normal limbs, thin lips, no dimples. Okay, I can tell you right now, I have recessive eye color, I have recessive hair color, I have recessive hands and normal limbs, and I have dimples though, and thin lips. So I'm a little bit of both, I guess. Alright, sex-linked traits. The sex chromosomes, the 23rd pair of chromosomes, determine biological sex. In females, the 23rd pair of chromosomes is made up of 2 large X chromosomes, XX. In males, it's XY. Okay? For males, the smaller Y chromosome often does not contain a corresponding gene segment to match with the one of the X. This means that a male can display certain recessive characteristics as a result of only having one recessive gene carried in as XY. So what that means is that men typically have more recessive genes than women. Traits determined by recessive genes on the X chromosomes are referred to as sex-linked recessive characteristics. So, men are typically colorblind. That's a recessive gene. There's more male redheads than there are female redheads, actually. That's a recessive gene, typically sex-linked. Physical and psychological. Physical development begins at conception. So soon as conception is made, physical development starts immediately. Physical maturity sets in on psychological abilities. Visual system not fully functional at birth. Okay, so even at birth, babies still can't see exactly what you look like. They can just see shapes. Language system not functional until much later. So babies still can't make words, shape words, form words, nothing of that. Prenatal environment can have a lifetime influence on health and intellectual ability. This idea is something very new. Only within the last 10 years do people actually pay attention to the prenatal environment. People thought that when you were born, the actual birthing process was your first environment. And very few people actually took into the womb in consideration. One of the reasons why people started taking the womb and prenatal environments seriously is because of the AIDS. AIDS contraction. The AIDS virus started being contracted by babies in the womb, and people started saying, oh, okay, well, that's the first environment. So let's talk about prenatal and childhood development. The prenatal development is defined as before birth, so as the development of the child in the womb. The prenatal stage begins at conception and ends with the birth of the child. At conception, chromosomes from the biological mother and father combine to form a single egg called a zygote. Okay, so the first stage is the zygote. The prenatal stage has 3 distinct phases: the germinal period and then the embryonic. Okay, so the prenatal development. Conception is when the sperm penetrates the ovum. A zygote is a fertilized egg. The germinal period is the first 2 weeks after conception. Embryonic period is weeks 3 through 8 after conception, and the fetal period between 2 months after conception until birth. Three major stages: germinal, embryonic, and fetal. From conception to zygote, okay? And looking at this diagram that I by accidentally hit, I'm sorry, you can see that the egg travels from the ovary into the ovum, okay, through the fallopian tubes, okay. While it's in the tubes, the egg becomes fertilized. The zygote travels down the fallopian tubes. The 2-cell stage is when the baby is starting to really develop form, and then its implantation into the uterus is where the baby truly starts forming. So until it implants into the uterus, the egg is still moving through the fallopian tubes. So the zygote is a newly fertilized egg. The first 2 weeks of the period are called rapid cell division. Attaches to the mother's uterine wall. At the end of the 14 days, becomes a cluster of cells called an embryo. Developing humans from about 14 days until the end of the 8th week. So not until the 8th week, after the 8th week, week 9, does it become a fetus. Time of rapid growth and intensive cell differentiation. So at this point, the cells are just creating, then dividing in order to replicate a lot of cells. At this stage, we're starting to have a lot of cells begin to specialize. Some that are going to be part of the brain, some are going to be part of the stomach, some are part of the muscle mass, all of that. Most of the major organs are formed during this time. So before the baby even becomes a fetus, in the first 14 weeks, it's already developing its organ systems. Genes on the sex chromosomes and hormonal influences trigger the initial development of sex organs. Okay? So at this point, it's going both ways. We have no clear distinction. Breasts are being developed on both. Okay? Nothing is clear whether it's a male or a female. Okay? The embryo is protectively housed in a fluid-filled amniotic sac. The embryo's lifeline is the umbilical cord. Via the umbilical cord, the embryo receives nutrients, oxygen, and water, and gets rid of carbon monoxide and other waste. So this sac, okay, is connecting it. It's the lifeline for the child in the uterus. Now this sac is called a placenta. It's a cushion of cells in the mother by which the fetus receives oxygen and nutrition. Acts as a filter to screen out substances that could be harmful to the fetus. The umbilical cord attaches the embryo to the placenta, a disc-shaped tissue on the mother's uterine wall. Now the placenta prevents the mother's blood from mingling with that of the developmental embryo, acting as a filter to prevent some, but not all, harmful substances that may be present in the mother's blood from reaching the baby. Okay, so the placenta is there to allow things to go through and to stop certain things from getting through. However, it's not always the case. So the prenatal development: day 1, the egg's fertilized. Day 2, division starts happening. Day 15, we have the embryonic disc. Okay, so it's now attached to the uterine wall. It's now fully starting to develop. We're also starting to see the structure of the outer portion of the baby. At day 23, the precursor of eyes, ears are present. Okay, and all of a sudden we start getting the brain functions. Day 21, developing brain, neural groove. Day 51, we start having something that starts to resemble a baby. Now in the fetal period, which starts after week 9, the period between the beginning of the 9th week until birth. By the end of the 3rd month, the fetus can move its arm and legs, mouth, and head. During the 4th month, the mother experiences quickening. She can feel the fetus moving. By the 5th month, the fetus has distinct sleep-awake cycles and periods of activity. During the 6th month, the fetus's brain activity becomes similar to that of a newborn baby. During the final 2 months, the fetus will double in weight. So the baby is technically experiencing brain waves and doing all that in month 6. However, the last couple of months is when the baby puts on weight. It's obviously babies are supposed to be in there until 9 months. But they are showing human forms, human shapes, beginning as day 51. So at day 45 in prenatal development, this is what a embryo, and this would be actually a fetus would look like. Okay, this is at 2 months. This is an embryo. Okay, so here's the inside of what a uterus looks like with a baby inside. Now the placenta is attached to the mother. Okay, the umbilical cord is attached to the placenta to the baby's belly button. The uterus, the fetus. Okay, amniotic fluid is surrounding the baby. So the prenatal influences that affect all babies is nutrition, anxiety, and mother's general health, maternal age, and teratogens, an agent that causes birth defect, drugs, radiation, viruses. Now obviously if the mother watches her nutrition, the healthier the baby is. If the mother's less stressed, the healthier the baby is. If the mother's healthy, the baby's healthy. If the mother's younger, the mother's going to be able to carry a child to term. Now there's also a flip side of that, is that if the mother's too young, her body is not so developed enough. So there is something as being too old, and there is something as in too young. Now, teratogens, we keep mentioning these things that can harm a baby during the prenatal stage. What they are is substances that pass through the placenta screen and prevent the fetus from developing normally. We mentioned exposures to radiation, diseases, syphilis, genital herpes, and AIDS obviously can affect toxic industrial chemicals such as mercury and PCBs, and drugs taken by mothers such as alcohol, nicotine, cocaine, and heroin. That's why it's illegal to smoke and to drink when you're pregnant, because it affects the child and can limit their abilities, especially brain development. We're going to show a clip in the prenatal development about teratogens and all of those things and how they affect babies, and you'll be really outraged by it all. Now, here's a perfect example of the average birth weight. The green is a non-smoker. Obviously, we want the baby to put on as much weight in the womb as they possibly can. When a baby's born, after the first month, they end up losing about almost a pound of weight, which is a lot for a baby. So, as you can see, the normal birth charging, okay, is good for the green line, non-smokers. That's the ideal. Now, a smoker of 1 to 20 cigarettes per day, you can see that it's significantly less. Okay, and then for a smoker over 20 cigarettes per day, you can see that it is very, very dangerous. Okay, very dangerous. Now, fetal alcohol syndrome is one of the most known issues to occur, or major issues that can occur during pregnancy. Clusters of defects occurring in infants born to mothers that drink heavily during pregnancy, misshaped bodies. We have a lot of mental retardation due to it. A leading cause of mental retardation is drinking during pregnancy. Can totally be prevented by abstaining from alcohol during pregnancy. Okay, so here we go. Time of exposure and major effects. So the more at different times you drink during the process, the more likely you're going to affect different things. Okay, so just look at this. The green is highly critical period of development. So between week 3 and week 16, okay, it is, if you are drinking between that part, mental retardation is probably going to occur. If you're drinking between week 3.5 and week 6, okay, you're probably going to affect the shape of the heart, or how weak the heart is. If you're drinking between week 5 and week 6, then their child's gonna develop a cleft lip. If you drink between week 4 and week 9, you're probably gonna have a low set, malformed ears, and deafness. Okay, so hopefully what you learned from this, especially the ladies watching this, is that there is no good time to drink during pregnancy. It's just not a good thing. Okay, so we're going to talk about brain development. I have a neat little clip for you to help explain how fast the brain goes and how dangerous it is when we are not allowing that baby to have the best environment possible. Overall, I hope you enjoyed this week. The content's a little simple. We're gonna get much more complicated once our little fetus is born. And I hope you have a great week. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in school Monday. See ya.